Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Mom's Favorites Books My Mother Loved. So today, I'm starting on this list, and like I said a couple of weeks ago, several weeks ago, however many weeks ago it was, um, that the books that I'm going to be doing for this are books that my mother enjoyed. That means that some of these are not going to be works of great literature. They're not necessarily going to be books that you put on your, top 10 books that you must read before you die in order to be an intelligent human being or what have you. That's my father's list, and if you want that list, I'm working through that one just as slowly as this one in my literary chatter series. All of the books that have the literary chatter uh, pre colon title thing, those are serious books. This, several of these books are just good, clean fun. Um, and this first book that I'm going to be talking about is actually very pertinent in a way because my mother, in the last few years of her life, had developed a very, very strong taste for the so called cozy mystery. A cozy mystery is definable by the fact that they are murder mysteries, but they're lighthearted. You don't have uh, dramatic, world changing events. You don't have unbearable amounts of gore. You don't have tension. You don't have, horrific serial killers doing horrific things. The murders, they are murders and they will obviously be disturbing, but they're not going to be something that gives you nightmares. The whole point of a cozy mystery is that you like the characters, that you like hearing the characters exchange witty comments, that they're fun or funny, that it's a book that's as much about cats as it is about the mystery, that it's a book as much about the romance between this woman and her love triangle between her and the police officer and the dentist. And for the record, that one was an actual example from one of the books that my mother listened to as an audiobook. So this first book um, comes recommended as something that my mother very, very much enjoyed. And that book is Rhys Bowen's Her Royal Spyness Solves Her First Case. This is a series of hence solves her first case. And as you can probably guess by this cover, this is set in the 1930s in England. I would assume primarily London. The bulk of this book took place in London. And the protagonist is a young woman who is 32nd in line for the throne of England, sort of a fictional, distant, tertiary line of the royal family. Because, of course, the thing about the royal family, about any royal family, is if you look enough, you can find, third cousins twice removed who, if you murdered 32 people, would wind up getting the throne. I mean, that's how royal families wind up working. Um, But the thing is that it is not only during the Depression, it's the 1930s, but they're one of those families of nobility that are slowly starting to fall on hard times because, well, that's one of those things that happened as the incredibly wealthy aristocracy began to lose the sway, the power that they had held in the Middle Ages, and so on and so forth. You started having more and more of them having to make their own way in a much more normal sense. Now, what we have here, though, is their protagonist is a young woman who is basically being backed into a corner. Her family doesn't have enough money to just support her in a frivolous jet setter lifestyle, but she doesn't want to get married to any of the people who might be proper marriage prospects for her. She doesn't want to have an arranged marriage done for various political or economic reasons, and she certainly doesn't want to marry Fishface the Romanian prince. And so she sets out to basically make her own way in London. Part of the reason she feels she can do this is because her mother was a commoner and her grandfather is a former police officer. And so her mother, who is a movie star and is off frittering away her time bouncing from man to man, and so isn't really all that much of a role model. But her grandfather is a lovely practical man, and she figures she goes to London and her family owns a house in London, so she will have a place to live. She has a place where she can sleep, and, it's not going to evaporate. And at the start of this book, she's just trying to figure out how to make a living. And she had settled on an remarkably genteel variant on being a maid, that her little group, her little one woman show specializes in airing out a home before people arrive. That instead of giving homes a proper cleaning, what she does is she shows up, she dusts a little bit, lays a fire so that, things are ready when people arrive, but she's not going to do a hardcore cleaning, a deep cleaning of the house. She'll, make sure that when you get there, the fires are already going so that you don't come home to a cold house and that sort of thing. Oh, very, very genteel, especially for a young woman who's never actually had to do such things and doesn't know how to lay a fire in a place and time when people still needed to actually lay fires because central heating wasn't nearly the thing it is now. She didn't know how to start up the boiler, and there are spiders down there. Then again, spiders being down there are something that upset a lot of people. Um, so this one was fun. It's a fun book. Our protagonist is witty and clever, although obviously a spoiled rich girl who is just discovering that the way that people live when they don't have infinite funds. And so it's a lot of it's a lot of silliness, and there comes a point in this when her brother and to a certain extent herself are effectively accused of murdering a man who, after all, apparently supposedly had a deed to their property because their father had gambled away the family seat in Scotland. And so she winds up investigating the murder, as most of these cozy mysteries go, because that's the thing about cozy mysteries is cozy mysteries are not about professional detectives, they're not about police officers. Cozy mysteries are nearly universally about somebody who gets involved in solving a mystery because they or someone they know has been accused of a murder, and they say, well, crap. I have to bail myself out of this, or I have to bail someone else out of this because the police aren't going to look further, or, I don't believe my sister could have done it, so I'm going to look into this to be sure that that the police aren't ignoring suspects other than my sister, or whatever the case may be. In this case, her brother, who is not the brightest spark, although apparently very kindly, having been accused of murder, she is, of course, determined that she's going to effectively keep him from getting hanged for murder. Well, so there's a whole lot of running around and flailing and a romance with a minor member of the nobility out of Ireland. Um, and there's, of course, the usual misunderstandings and the assumption that the Irish guy might be the killer, only, of course, it turns out it's not him. Um, it's actually the guy with the lisp. I'm just going to I'm just going to give it away now. Mostly because, of course, I'm the kind of person who doesn't actually care who the murderer is. I just enjoy reading the story, which is how my mother does it, how my mother did it. That was you read when you read something like a cozy mystery, it's less about solving the mystery and more about watching the story unfold. If you're the kind of person who likes solving the mystery, then, good for you and have fun. But I've never really seen the attraction, which I suppose is part of why I don't tend to read a lot of not cozy mysteries when I do read mysteries. It's because I don't ultimately really care who it is. I care about the story and my protagonist. Anyhow, so I can't really say a lot about this, because, well, fantasy novels are very much my genre, which you might have noticed things have gotten very top heavy of late with fantasy, and that's because most of my reading is fantasy, and eventually I was going to hit the point where I just had to buckle down and do all of those books. So this this cozy mystery is slightly out of my wheelhouse. But it was fun, and I can understand why my mother liked it. It it's this whole thing is a little bit difficult for me, of course, because I'm talking about this as a way of getting to know my mother, and in a way. And so this fun, this silliness, the, witty young woman running around London trying to both solve mysteries and clean houses and avoid getting married off by the queen, it's it is in some ways a part of my mother that I didn't know very well. And so uh it's just very hard, I guess. Anyways, back to the book. I don't actually have all that much to say because this cover here says an insightful blend of old-fashioned whodunit, clever satire, and drawing room comedy of errors. Um, Honestly, I think what makes up this book is not clever satire or drawing room comedy of errors. It's it's the perspective of our protagonist. It's the perspective of her, of the way she thinks quickly and just rattles things off in that very flippant, very upper crust, very ever so slightly a hint of upper class twit, um, but subsumed in the fact that she's genuinely clever and is struggling very, very hard to avoid getting backed into a corner in a whole bunch of different ways. So, um, if you like lighthearted fun, then I can recommend the book. If you don't like silly trumpery and young ladies running around like lunatics trying to avoid Prince Siegfried Fishface from Romania, then maybe you should give this a miss. And I think that's everything. So back to our regularly scheduled doldrums next week.